why is that happening right now? I'm just opening the website and see that the biggest wartime buyers of Russian fossil fuels, but speaking about oil, why is the leaders who's buying Russian oil right now in European Union? Hungary, not surprised. Belgium, partially, I think. Slovakia and also France. Why is that happening, still happening in Europe?
Well, just to be clear, it's wrong that they're doing that, and that does help Putin's war effort. But even if we stop that, that's not fundamental. Fundamental is to stop Russia from exporting oil. And if I could just explain, you asked me earlier, is it possible to do this? As you know, under this oil price cap, they're allowed to export their oil. It's just that they have to only charge a certain amount, and that just hasn't worked. They're sending tremendous amount of oil to China and India, and they're making sufficient money to continue the war, okay? So it has to be taken offline. Russia has three primary ports it exports from on the westward. One is Primorsk, Ost-Lunga, and Novorossiya in the Black Sea. And then there's another major one on the eastern side of Russia. These three ports, if they stopped exporting oil, this would be well over 3 million barrels a day, 3.5 million barrels a day at least of Russian oil. Now, there's various ways. If that was sanctioned, what the United States can do is they have to put secondary sanctions on India and China, the two primary buyers. And Trump is doing this with this idea of secondary tariffs, which seems could be fairly effective. If you see what he's focused on India first. And India, of course, Modi is very publicly very resistant, very truculent. Oh, no, I won't give in to you. I'm a friend, sort of a longtime friend of Russia in a certain way. But meanwhile, I look in the industry journals, and within a day or two, the main importers of oil in India had already booked 22 million barrels of non-Russian oil. So this can have a stark effect and probably cut off the oil that India is able to take if Trump pursues it. And then he has to decide whether he's going to pursue that with China. Now, this tells me Putin understands that this is a disaster. If he can't export this oil, this will kill his budget. And it's interesting that he immediately says, oh, I want to meet you in Alaska. I want to talk. Whether he's serious or not, I don't know. But he understands that this can be existential for his country. The Secretary of Interior in the United States, Mr. Bergram, he's been talking rather quietly. You might not have seen it in the press much, but for a long time, he says, if we take Russia offline, we should take them off permanently. Now, it's not just bluster. Russia is very vulnerable. They have no place to store their oil if they keep pumping it and they can't export it from these 3 or 4 ports. What do? They can't dump it on the ground for very long. And the problem is the West Urals, where it comes from, these are very old fields. And if you slow them down too much or stop them, you're basically not going to get them going again without very advanced technology and hundreds of millions of dollars spent. So essentially, it would ruin the Russian oil sector forever, basically forever, for a very long period of time, especially if it happened in winter. Those fields would wax up. So it's realistic, very realistic, that the United States can ruin the Russian oil sector. And we could talk about this more. There is plenty of oil available that could be brought online stepwise. And I think the United States has been preparing to do this for a number of months quietly to replace that oil.
Yeah, but if they will do that, what's going to happen in the oil market in general after that?
You mean if the Russian oil was not replaced?
Replaced, yes.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't replaced, the price would spike. We'd have a huge, would cause economic. But the point is, it's perfectly possible to replace it. Now, if you look at what Trump has done, when he came in office, of course, he had this idea. He wants to make peace in Ukraine, fine, but he wants to do it in a way that pulls Putin away from China. So he insisted on talking, I think, longer than any reasonable person would have. But now he realizes that Putin hasn't been serious. So now, if we look back, even in January when he was inaugurated, his cabinet was talking about a plan B all along. And the plan B would be A, give Ukraine basically any weapons they need, and there is some plan like that now that the Europeans pay for. But the other part of Plan B was to kill the Russian oil exports and ruin their economy. And I interpret, for example, when Trump went to the Middle East, to the Gulf states, he had this sort of love fest meeting with the Qataris, with the UAE, and with the Saudis, the last two being very big oil producers. And it was about that time that the Saudis, since the beginning of the year, but especially since that time, have insisted that OPEC pump more oil, put their oil back on the market that they had held off. Now, it didn't seem to make any sense because it's driving the price down. So why would they be doing this? People said, to take market share. But to me, what makes sense is they understand that the Americans are preparing to take Russia offline. And hey, for the Saudis, this is business. The UAE, it's business. We'll take their market share. In the past, when Obama did this, for example, when he wanted to take Iran offline, the Chinese complained very loudly, sort of like Modi is. But what the Americans did is they talked to the king. They made sure that he had the UAE produce new oil. And in fact, so much oil, when it got to the level of new oil they were putting on the market rapidly that equaled the amount China was getting from Iran, China flipped its vote at the UN and supported sanctions. So my guess is the United States has been behind the scenes working to do things like this, to see that the Saudis, the UAE, and others, its own shale producers also, will have plenty of oil out there. There may even be deals to try and take care of India and China.
Yeah, Mr. O'Donnell, I was thinking why the US still has sanctioned India but not China, and I was thinking what other methods of pressure can be imposed on Beijing. I don't know. If not sanctions, then what else? Well, one could interpret it different ways. Okay, if you want to completely not trust Trump, then say he's Mr. Taco, another one he gives up on. He's not going to go after China. He'll go after the weaker one, India. Now, I don't know. Another way to look at it is you've got India and China. You don't jump on them both at the same time. India is most vulnerable, and you can see the effect, as I mentioned earlier. It's already having effect. They're already looking for alternative oil. No matter what they say, they're very vulnerable. Now, China, historically, when Americans have even under this price cap thing, when they've said, we're going to put secondary sanctions on banks or any refineries that finance oil banks that finance oil for refineries, that's Russian oil, that's above the price cap, the Chinese immediately backed off. They want to use the dollar in the world, their companies. They immediately backed off and quickly found other banks and tried to find ways around it. So China could be quite vulnerable, and I don't know, but there's these negotiations going on with China, and there's a deadline of several days, and it may be that when that deadline comes up, that's when Trump will do this with China. But let me just say, if the idea here was to force Putin to negotiate and more seriously negotiate, he's got it for right now. And I think Trump might sit back for a little while and say, okay, let's see what Putin says. And if it's not adequate, then I would assume after he goes after India, he has to go after China. And the United States, if they want to do this, and all the signals I've seen is they're preparing for a long time systematically, they can do this. It would be quite a conflict, but they can do this. And that would make it very difficult for Russia to continue after several months of not being able to pump this oil. But we can't say for sure, but based on things that have happened before when severe sanctions are put on Iran or other countries and relationships, this all sort of smells familiar to me. But if the American president will impose sanctions against China, don't you think he will push India closer to China? We will see a strong global south against the United States?
Well, that's what they've been threatening, okay? Yeah. Obviously. And truth be told, like I said, talk is one thing. Look at where they're buying their oil. So Modi is making a big deal. He doesn't want to completely cut off Russia. But, even on arms, he seems beholden to Russia on arms. for a number of years now, the Chinese have been moving away from Russian arms because the Russians have difficulty providing them. They have great difficulty with quality control. And so India was already moving that way. And India had problems with China because of border conflicts and so forth. They had, real problems. So, to me, it's quite interesting that the American president is willing to take the chance that, India might go with China or might break with the United States in order to force Putin to the peace table. What more can you ask in a certain sense? I can't guarantee what will happen in the future, but he's doing what has to be done with this pressure on India. And I think India is very vulnerable. The United States is their main market for exports. If they continue buying Russian oil and the Americans continue with this, I think they're going to have to give in. And then you have to move on to China.
Yes, because India was not buying Russian oil until 2022, to be honest, right?
Very little, a small amount.
Yeah.
But now, if you talk about West Urals oil, the oil that mainly goes out the Western ports, they're taking about 80% of that. But India and China together, if you take all the Russian oil, there's Russian oil from other places besides the West Urals. In total, India and China are taking 90% of what Putin exports. Now, it's actually kind of interesting. Why India and China? That's only two targets we have to go at then. And I think it's been clear for a long time, Putin could have just as well spread this oil out in 40, 50 countries. But by going with India and China, what's he looking for? He's looking for votes in the UN. He's looking for big allies that can stand with him. He's not looking for a lot of small, Asian countries or countries that are, more close to the United States who won't do this reliably. So this is a big stakes geopolitical game on both sides.